That's $10 billion more than what we had 10 years ago. We're there, gang. And Hayek demonstrates this road leads to one destination. Now, I have to tell you, my copy of this book doesn't look like this. It doesn't even have a picture on the cover. And the first time I opened this book, I said, oh, you gotta be kidding. It's like, I mean, I've read The Roots of Modern Liberalism by, on Woodrow Wilson. And I needed a rope to hang myself. I mean, this thing is, I mean, look at the bottom of each of these pages. It's all footnotes. It's really, it sat at my desk for a while, and I'm like, I can't read that thing. It's the best thing you could read. There's a reason this book was banned in places like Germany and the Soviet Union. In just a few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who risked his freedom to read this. 7 years in prison. If he was caught giving this book to somebody else, 12 years of hard labor, that was a certain death sentence. He did it. Why? Why? For a book that sat on my desk. I didn't want to read. It was too hard. Nobody has even heard of. I mean, connected people, but the average person, you go down the street and say, hey, have you read this? No. Why did people risk their lives to read this? They knew over in the Soviet Union, if people would read this man's words, the tyrants would be over. Now, here in America, we're not banning books. We're not dishing out hard labor sentences. No, no, no. We can just watch television and be distracted. But while we're being distracted, there is something here that I think is pretty shocking. There is a publisher, we just found this yesterday, selling copies of the Constitution. But when you buy the Constitution, I want to show you what comes along with the Constitution. There it is. Show the disclaimer. There's a disclaimer now with the Constitution. This book is a product of its time and does not reflect the same values as it would if it were written today. You got that one right. Parents might wish to discuss with their children how views on race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and interpersonal relations have changed since this book was written before allowing them to read this classic work. That is the U.S. Constitution with a disclaimer. There is a war for the future of mankind. There is a war for the future of this country. It is being waged right now, but it doesn't feel like a war because they've got to keep you asleep. Wake up, America! The questions of our future can always be answered with information. And I hate to disagree with those in Washington, but there ain't such a thing as too much information. We can figure it out. If you have information, you see the glories and the mistakes of our past, it's okay. It's the only way you can see the truth. Today, we're going to give you another option. Because everybody says capitalism is bad. Everything's too greedy. Everything's too big to fail. We got to spend, spend, spend. Let's go to global governance. Let's control everything through a giant progressive monolith. You know what? If you're like I was just a few years ago, you kind of just shrug your shoulders and say, well, I don't know. What else do you do? There is another road. If you don't learn the things that no one is willing to teach today, there is going to be a lot more than a disclaimer on our Constitution. I'm going to introduce you in just a second to a couple of people that know about this book a lot more than I do, can explain it to you, and then I'm going to introduce you to the guy who risked going to jail. Wait until you hear his story. Coming up in just a second. Today we're talking about the book Road to Serfdom. F.A. Hayek published it in the 1940s. And, you know, I don't have a warning label for it, but total government leads to a loss of freedom. That's what it should say right on the cover. Hayek pointed out that total government needed propaganda and somebody to blame, a scapegoat. Those people. But the good news is we don't ever do that. Right?
The party is over. The era of golden parachutes for high-flying Wall Street operators is over.
I refuse to let America go back to the culture of irresponsibility and greed that made it possible. Back to an economy with soaring CEO salaries and shrinking middle-class incomes.
They're thinking the same old thing that got us here, greed.
I did not run for office to be helping out a bunch of fat cat bankers on Wall Street.
I don't sit around just talking to experts because this is a college seminar. We talk to these folks because they potentially had the best answers, so I know who's asked to kick.
I've never heard a president say anything like that, and it's not the A word that bothers me. It's justice. You're there to make sure that justice is applied, not to kick people's ass. Thomas E. Woods, Jr., he's a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, author of the upcoming book, Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. We're talking about Road to Serfdom. I don't know what happened to my copy. Here it is. Road to Serfdom. When we were talking about propaganda, you got to find a bad guy first, yep, right? And you got to sell that.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Soviet Union, it's the saboteur, it's bad weather, it's conspirators. I mean, you see it in the book Animal Farm. That's essential. And what helps also in our case is that American kids, from the time they're in first grade, are taught a narrative of American history in which the government is there. They're composed of wonderful, selfless public servants. Mm-hmm. The public sector is full of people who, if they had their chance, they would employ you in the mines 100 hours a week at 2 cents a day, and we certainly don't want to go back to that. So thank heavens for our wise overlords. And people believe this. Okay, a lot of our people believe it.
So what does he say in Road to Serfdom about greed or about capitalism or the free market system and being able to have sanity? Because that's what he's after, greedy people.
If you look at centrally planned economies, which is the target of his book, are we going to say those economies are not organized by greed? Except the greed is placed differently. This time it's the greed of the bureaucrats, the apparatchiks. There's always a two-tier system. In this case,
the labor unions here.
The labor unions. But in the centrally planned economies, it was the people running the show. They got the good cars, they got the medical care, and everybody else, in effect, was a serf. So you're going to say that system isn't run by greed?
How different is that, though? Let me ask the audience. I mean, who gets the good medical care? Now, under this new system that they have, who gets the best medical care? Congress. Yeah, Congress. Yeah. Congress gets it. So, I mean, it's the same exact story. But they also, and you've touched on it here, they also want to make everybody in Washington, and this is Woodrow Wilson 101, the administrators have nothing to gain, so they're good guys. That gives them the power to distribute wealth and to have welfare systems. What is the road to serfdom? What does that even mean?
Well, when he talks about the road to serfdom, what he's warning about is that people think that there's a way to centrally plan an economy or run a society or engage in some sort of planning that doesn't involve methods we would find utterly distasteful and barbaric. And that, in fact, what you think you're doing is bringing about prosperity for everybody. What you're instead doing is moving us along a road that can lead to places nobody wants to go to, all in the name of providing everybody with security, just like a serf. A serf had security. He was going to be fed. Sure, he's stuck on the land. He can't choose his occupation. And some other person has an initial claim on his income, but he's not going to die.
Right.
And so in exchange for that, you get security.
And the reason why Europe didn't mind serfdom is because they had come out of slavery. Serfdom, we view as slavery, not hard slavery like early 20th century, colonial America and the rest of the world, not in chains, etc., etc. But serfdom was slavery light. It was you work, you do your own hours, whatever. You just give me the bushel of grain,
right? And
you can marry whoever you want, so it's not slavery. But that's kind of the system we're creating here, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it's starting to come apart, especially as we see in Europe. A lot of these impossible promises that governments have made, all with supposedly good intentions, are coming apart. And in the meantime, the citizens have become so tethered to government, they don't know how to live otherwise. So now we're going to start to see riots across Europe. The possibility that people in their 20s, in their teens, could have a decent life is being destroyed by systems that are going to require these kids, because of the aging of the population, to work until they're ready to drop dead. They will never be able to retire. and the system's going to collapse anyway. And if anybody thinks that a few speeches delivered off a teleprompter is going to fix that, then the government schools are worse than we thought.
Let me ask you this, because I cannot convince 80% of the country, 90% of the country, even people who are on my side, that there's no difference between the socialists of the Nazi regime and the socialists of the communist regime. Isn't he the first guy that said, there's no difference here? There's no difference.
He has a chapter in the book called The Socialist Roots of Nazism, which is a very unfashionable thing to say, because we all think that National Socialism is about wearing funny hats and having a swastika. But he's